There is an increasing breakdown in the communication between young and older farmers, and both are struggling to get what they want. Do you know it well? We've all heard the scenarios. And of course, this generation of farmers were raised by parents who lived through World War II. Many audience members of Sarah's Country, I know, which shaped their childhoods and where no one spoke about the emotional stuff, fear and weakness. No positive feedback was given because, of course, what that would lead to would be a big head. But times have changed. And there's now a contrast in the generation entering the workforce, or let alone the ones we want to attract in desperately into the workforce. And we need to give this growing constant stream of feedback via social media and online, because that's how our lives have become so very different. So joining us tonight is 2019 Nuffield Scholar Hamish Murray, talking about his Nuffield Scholarship report around this topic. It's an interesting one, Hamish, because, your parents could be watching this. How do they feel about you approaching a topic like this for your Nuffield?
It stemmed from, being a family business and sensing those changes and things that are happening, that communication with my father, and then relaying that to staff on farm, and the frustrations that I could see between the different generations. So it's a very personal thing, and I don't think my father would have any problem with that. It's as things change and develop, it's all about how we can improve and be better. So yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, and knowing Chid personally, I totally understand where you're coming from. He's certainly not one to hold back his opinion. So now tell us about your journey, which comes through the wonderful experience around the world with Nuffield, and what you could take from overseas and what you learnt from here at home.
Yeah, well, it started with me. The high country is one of the last bastions of a good, keen, hardworking bloke, and things that I was finding, now running our business, it was finding harder and harder to attract people to a business like ours. Despite the romance that goes with the high country, and rather than think outwardly, not the right people, I decided to focus on what made businesses more attractive, or how did they engage and motivate their staff, and so I was lucky enough through the Nuffield travel to observe businesses around the world in different industries other than agriculture and see what they were doing. So it stemmed from a very personal problem, and you've got to look at other businesses.
In parts like Silicon Valley and the tech industry, what did you learn from there?
Yeah, vastly different. But the thing that was most fascinating for me out of visiting the Silicon Valley was a chance encounter I had with a couple of game developers, computer game developers, and it was through the discussion I had with them around how they incorporate feedback into their game development that is all part of keeping people engaged and motivated, but also kind of addicted, but they provided an enjoyable experience that meant that people kept developing. And so thinking about that, and then taking those ideas and thinking about how did that differ for a farm business, and so that's where I came up with this, where we discussed this idea of feedback and how crucial it is in keeping people engaged. But don't get me wrong, it's not around, so when I relate that to our younger staff and people, it's not around tell me how good I am. It's merely a fact of knowing where a person is in their development. It's a competitive world out there, and these younger generations want to know how they're achieving, how they can get better and develop that. And so they do that through the feedback that's around them. And so I realized my father and even myself weren't very good at giving feedback, and it was a skill that I needed to work on, and that we try to work on with our team. So learning the skills around that was one of the insights I got from the Silicon Valley anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's certainly something that we talked about lots on the Will to Live tour. Hamish, was around the fact that you can never actually give somebody a big enough head in the rural sector, especially in New Zealand, the way that we're so bloomin' humble, that it can only lead to better staff retention. I mean, is there some of those things that you found through that in terms of that, return on investment, things like feedback?
Yeah, hugely. We're term as farmers and as people, we're emotionally stingy, if you get it's so it's hugely important to reward people and keep them engaged and motivated, feeling valued. But then also equally, it's equally important to be able to deliver feedback in a way that lands correctly with someone as well. So there's two sides to the story, because we've all had situations where our emotions have got in the way of delivering what was an effective piece of feedback when the intention was really to help or grow that person, and our emotions have got in the way of delivering that well. So there's two sides to the feedback element, and as an individual myself, understanding how to deliver that is a really key skill to learn and to master.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I read something, there's the Good Boss campaign that is a collaborative industry-wide thing with Federated Farmers, Dairy NZ, et cetera, and a lot of people are leaving the industry, not for the hard work, but how they're treated. And then to hear on Talkback a farmer ring up and say, there's plenty of jobs here, but just expect to be told what to do. Like, when are we going to get it?
Yeah, that's a really crucial one. You touch on that idea of being told what to do. Our whole education system these days is based around teaching kids and people how to solve for their own problems. In the old days, no disrespect, but people were taught to were rote learning books and things. You learnt your answer that you recited in your exam. These days, it's around learning and teaching kids where to find the right information and what's credible and how to solve for their own problems. We're in an age of information abundance. So, with that in mind, we're thinking about the younger generation coming onto farm who have had a schooling system that's grown up where they've solved for their own problems, and all of a sudden they get a grumpy old boss who tells them, do this, and do it this way, rather than why they're doing something and coaches them how to actually achieve it for themselves. It's no wonder that they can get lost in the system. And so I suppose my plea is, as employers and as leaders in agriculture, we have to learn these skills and think about how we can change and adapt our businesses to make them more attractive and engaging and motivating.
And lastly, Hamish, while I've got you here, because you're an absolute classic example of this, and I've been very critical of the sheep and beef industry in regards to career pathways in comparison to, dairy, horticulture, let alone the trades, who have done a very good job in terms of apprenticeships. In sheep and beef, there's a lot of passionate young fellas and women who want to be shepherds, yet the barriers to start are so high with needing trained dogs and knowing how to ride and shoe a horse and ride a motorbike. What would you like to see in terms of opening up that pathway for those passionate people wanting to have the romance of the high country?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I don't know the answer to. I really don't know the answer to. So I think personally about how it might apply. And so this, as someone who is passionate about the high country and wants to see people engaged and enjoying that, it's support as an employer to help take on an apprentice and to give them understand our business has a set number of employees. We can't afford to take on more than we need to, sort of thing. But the coaching and the education that goes with providing that sort of support to somebody is huge. I really like the cadet farm in those models. I think they're great. I just don't know that there's enough of them and enough people with the coaching skills, and I'm sure there are people with the coaching skills, but to have them all in the right places is, I think, the right pathway to bridge that gap at the moment. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know the answer.
Just before you leave, I've just got a funny story that once a young man called Tony Glynn told me. He used to work for a man that you would have known called Roy Cameron up the Clarence Reserve, Hamish. And he said, I need you to ride out the back there and just check if there's any fuel in that dozer, which was an 8-hour ride. And he rode back another 8 hours and he said, yep, there's fuel in it. And Roy said, yeah, I thought there was.
Yeah, I can think of the country that they're covering, and it's probably a testament to the time or the bosses of that age. He was testing the man and to see his medal, and it's not kind of what we want to do, but I can understand how it happens.
Yeah, and in your part of the world, some very, very tough country. Thank you so much, Hamish Murray, for taking the time to join us there from the Bluff Station, and the last in our series of the 2019 Rural Leaders, and their reports that you can get at ruralleaders.co.nz. This is Sarah's Country.